Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Adventures Through the Mind, a podcast that explores topics relevant and related to psychedelic culture, medicine, and research, always with the underlying question of how we work with and through our psychedelic experiences to become better people, and not just for ourselves, but in our relationships, in our communities, and in the world, knowing that it is not by the psychedelic experience itself that becoming better people happens. It requires a certain amount of preloaded preparatory mindset work and post-journey integration, both mindset and pragmatic actionable work. And this podcast is trying to support the larger mindset, the larger sort of cultural and personal psychological context within which psychedelic experiences can help us become better people and how we might get there. So here we are. This is episode 153, and we're going to be talking with Dr. Monica Gagliano. We're going to be talking about plant intelligence, and in the trend of the recent episodes that have been released, I wrote an overture for this particular episode, which sort of shares my thoughts on the topic and gives you a sense of what we're stepping into. And you can read this overture at jameswjessup.com in the show notes for this episode. Nonetheless, here it is, and here we go. Plant intelligence is contentious. By this, I mean that not only does it tangle itself up in the problem of how we define what intelligence is, which itself has a long and nuanced history, but plant intelligence as a proposition challenges the very ontological foundation which most scientists and many of us brought up in the dominant culture of the postmodern West understand the natural world. That ontological foundation is anthropocentrism and the human-generated model of life being a hierarchy with humans on top. With regards to what is or isn't intelligent, this anthropocentrism is expressed in placing human cognitive capacity as the yardstick for what defines intelligence, wherein the intelligence of other creatures is measured in reference to how close or how far it is from humans, in which case plant intelligence is absurd. Plants aren't humans or even close to humans, so they can't be considered intelligent, at least according to this model. However, what if humans, having decided that human cognition defines intelligence, and thus only humans or human-like behaviors can warrant the claim, is a fallacious basis of investigation informed by ideology, not by fact or truth, or science, for that matter? What if plant intelligence is real? What if plants are intelligent? What does that mean for our understanding of intelligence itself? Furthermore, what if plant intelligence is such that it warrants regarding plants as a someone and not a something? What might that mean for our personal relationships to plants, plant medicines, and psychedelics? What might plants being intelligent someones infer about the ideology of anthropocentrism, which places all non-human life beneath human superiority? What would that say about our engagement of the natural world as being merely generators of resources for us to use and profit off however we see fit? And now, the issue of plant intelligence and all that it infers really becomes contentious, as it seems that perhaps plant intelligence isn't so much an academic issue of definitions anymore, but an ethical issue which questions and thus challenges the very institutional foundation upon which our global civilization is presently operating. So plant intelligence is a big topic with a lot of consequence, and it's Adventures Through the Mind's pleasure to welcome Dr. Monica Gagliano on the show to explore this topic with us. Monica Gagliano is a research associate professor in evolutionary ecology. A former fellow of the Australian Research Council, she is Research Associate Professor Adjunct at the University of Western Australia and a member of the Sydney Environment Institute at the University of Sydney. She is currently based at Southern Cross University, where she directs the BiLab, the Biological Intelligence Lab, as a part of the Diverse Intelligences Initiative of the Templeton World Charity Foundation. Her work has extended the concept of cognition, including perception, learning processes, and memory, in plants. Her latest book, Thus Spoke the Plant, which I have here somewhere, Thus Spoke the Plant, which you're seeing on YouTube there, was released in 2018, but she is also one of the editors for The Mind of Plants, Narratives of Vegetal Intelligence, which released just this last month, October of 2021, through Synergistic Press. In this interview, Dr. Gagliano takes us on a deep dive into the results of her scientific research into plant intelligence, but she also shares the profound impact of her personal encounters with the living intelligence of the natural world and what those encounters have revealed about herself, about life, and about the murderous consequences of modern scientific training. We also explore definitions of intelligence and plant intelligence, the impact of anthropocentrism on our relationship to the natural world, listening to and learning from plants, and the role of altered states and psychedelics in our capacity to directly communicate with not only plants, but the intelligent life of nature itself. Okay, so that's the overture to today's episode. We're talking with Dr. Monica Gagliano, primarily in reference to her book, Thus Spoke the Plant, which I read just shortly before interviewing her. Before we get into this interview, a big thanks to my patrons on Patreon who make this podcast possible. The people whose names are listed in the credits to this episode, wherever you're checking it out or on the screen here on YouTube, they give significantly, some of which for a long time. So thank you so much to them. Patreon is an online platform that allows people who create stuff to get funded by people who find value in the stuff that they create on a model of reciprocity and generosity, where things such as this podcast, I can produce it for free and remain independent in producing it for free. And I can do that full time and earn an income doing so. And this is my full-time work, this podcast, and the body of work and research that informs it. And my patrons are people that, like I said, with generosity, decide to voluntarily, financially support that work, and it allows me to earn an income. And I'm happy, I'm very happy and pleased and satisfied and grateful for that. So thank you so much, patrons, and thank you to everyone who has donated financially, be it a present patron, a former one, or someone who has offered a one-time donation. If you are not a patron and you're not able to contribute financially to the show, don't worry about it. It's free for you to enjoy, and the people who do contribute make it available for you. So enjoy. If you are able to contribute, please do so. Patreon is absolutely, for me, the most reliable and the most positive. And in that sense, it's something like whatever you like, but I ask for about a cup of coffee a month, which is something like $5 for 2 podcasts that you get to enjoy a month, and plus bonus related stuff that comes out at different times. So that'd be great if you could do that. You could give less, you could give more, but that's about the ask. And if you can, I ask you to do so. There are other ways to support, including purchasing from one of our affiliate companies, leaving PayPal donations, crypto donations, buying something off the shop. Links to that are on the description of this episode too. And yeah, much appreciated. If you don't support this podcast, please do support another independent podcast or creator. As the corporate field starts to take over the podcasting scene, it's going to be really important for us to be supporting independence in order to sort of keep the content from all just getting, the language that's coming up is whitewashed, but that might not apply in all circumstances. But nonetheless, it's important for us to be supporting independent creators. So if it's not me, please have it be somebody else. And that's all for this intro. Thank you so much for listening to it. And here is my interview with Dr. Monica Gagliano, episode 153 of Adventures Through the Mind, Exploring Plant Intelligence. Enjoy. But let's jump into the interview. Are you ready? Are you good to go?
Yeah, sure. Yeah,
okay.
Sure.
Great. So, I really loved your book, Monica. Dr. Gagliano, pardon me. I really loved your book. And and I actually, so we met in passing a little bit. I think we shared a short conversation at Rebel Herbal Gathering in Australia, 2019, which I was just looking over some photos and videos from then when I was on like a nostalgia kick. And I was like, oh, that was so nice. Oh, traveling. It was a thing. But but yeah, you gave an incredible talk about plant intelligence, and shortly after that, somebody gave me your book. They like put it in my hand and they said, "You need to read this," and I was like, "I think you're right." And then I waited until springtime this year. I don't know why I didn't do it last year, but I was like, I feel like I need to read this book in the spring, and I think it was a right choice. And so I've just finished it, and I really, really loved it. And simply put, right, it explores your research and your explorations into plant intelligence. Not a tagline that really reflects the depth of care and investigation that you put into the book, but possibly an entry-level tagline. So I want to start the interview out with something sort of simple, or maybe not just simple, general, which is, and I've got these questions written down today for some reason. What is intelligence? What is plant intelligence? And what are some of the research study you or others have published that support the proposition that such an intelligence is real? For example, your work with corn, peas, and Mimosa pudica.
Mm-hmm. So thank you for having me. And I should acknowledge that I'm sitting in the office at home, and I'm based on Araku country, which is part of the Banjalan Nation, and that is the northern region of Australia in New South Wales, just outside Byron, basically, Byron Bay. Okay, big introduction, big question. Intelligence. So it depends who you ask. So what I can offer is only the definition that I use. Different disciplines will intersect into this field and define it in very different ways. So when there is such a diversity of definition, I usually go back to the root of the word, because obviously the definition is contingent to what field and what interest and what perspective you're taking. But the etymology of the word usually kind of tell you exactly where the original concept was coming from. So I like to go there to the beginning. And intelligence comes from intelligere, and the word of itself just means choosing between. So anyone, no matter what form, doesn't have to be human, they can choose between options. So that we're talking about decision making, choice behavior, but also because those processes are supported and they cannot happen without processes like learning and memory. So all of this suddenly becomes a big umbrella under which you are exhibiting intelligent behavior. And that is really the cognitive realm, because again, cognition, another keyword that is defined in many ways, but ultimately cognition at the root level means to know. And for you to know, you need to be able to explore, to communicate, to learn, to remember, and then make a decision in that space, which is exactly what intelligence behavior actually describes. So cognition is the umbrella under which a variety of intelligent behaviors can take place. So intelligence of itself is not a trait, it's not a property that you are either intelligent or not, but it's something that you exhibit, that you show through your actions or through your behaviors. And so that's my take on what I mean by intelligence. And this is in general, you can be human, you can be a bacteria, I don't mind. When we come to plant and we define plants specifically as intelligent being, or we ask the question whether they are intelligent beings, what we are really asking is, are they able to learn? Are they able to remember things? Do they make choices? Do they decide between options? And how do they communicate those options or those decisions, if they do, to others maybe? And the science that has been taking place now for the last few decades, really, slowly creeping in, show very clearly the plants are very good at doing a lot of these things. And not just plants, but other organisms that have no nervous system. And this is a key point, because the major issue for some, so the major point of debate which from my perspective shouldn't even be a debate, but it is, hinges on the fact that how can it be possible that a plant or another organism like a plant that doesn't have a brain, it doesn't have neurons, and doesn't have a nervous system can do these things that you're saying they're doing? And so, first of all, I'm not saying that they're doing it. We have science and not just my work. My work focused specifically on learning and memory and decision making. But many before me, over the decades before me, had done work on plant communication, which is also like you're choosing to share certain information with others, and then you act according to what information you receive. So you had to again make a decision. What are you going to do based on what you're being given? And that kind of research was already in place when I kind of started delving into the plant research, and mostly focused on the communication with the volatiles and the communication underground with root exudates. And this is all chemical based, but we knew even from before then that plants are using light, not just to photosynthesize, but also to literally, in a way, see what's around them. So plants can discriminate colors. They will be able to see where a fence is. That's why climbers are so good at finding them and climbing over them. And more recently, we have seen work where, plants can find support structures and curl around them in a very exploratory way. So they explore the space around them. And then when they detect a structure, they're like, there is something there. And then they start climbing it. So it's not just like, I bumped into it and then I just grow in there. No, there is in a way, there is a purposeful behavior there. Someone is deciding, I am going to choose this structure and I'm going to build around my new, my new being. Now, the core issue then for some is, but how can they do all of these things? And when I started working on the learning aspect and memory, because one thing is to talk about, plants communicate with chemicals. It's kind of like, it feels like, I can kind of accept that. We all have experienced, imagine like brushing your hand on a basil plant. We all have experienced the aromatic, volatile that comes out of some plants, and we can connect with the idea like, those chemicals could, deliver some information, and, they could be useful for that. And we have an intuitive feeling that could make sense. But to say that the plants can actually remember, it's a different story because we can't see that, and to say that a plant can learn because plants move, but at a time scale that is so different from us that we feel like they don't move. But to say that a plant learn, it's difficult for us literally to see that. So to experience that. And so because of our own sensorial difficulty, we're just assuming it's not there. But when you slow the time down of the human so that you can enter the time of the plant, and you can do that, obviously, we use technology as well to support us in support our sensory apparatus to be able to enter in those spaces. Then some things become really obvious, I mean, anybody can do a time lapse of germinating seedlings. And of course, if you're just staring at the seedling, you don't see anything. But if you let the camera capture those images over time, and only in a few days, you would see a lot of movement. It's not just growth. It's like a lot of movement, searching for light, searching for things, exploring. And so I guess, so the difficulty and the core of the debate, it's about our inability to see them for who they are, because they embody and they inhabit a very different time and spatial landscape, basically. And then there is also, on top of that, there is our own anthropocentric bias, which drives much of the debate. And the bias is very simple. It says like, humans have a brain, humans have a nervous system. This is how we do those things that we call learning, memory, and all of the cognitive stuff. So basically, unless you are similar to me and you do things as I do them, you can't do them. That's how pathetic and how basic the thing is, which actually is quite nonsensical. But because the evidence shows exactly the opposite. Like, you don't actually need a brain and a neural system. It might be, if you have one, that's how you do it, because that's how your system works, but it doesn't preclude other systems to do exactly the same process in a different way. So plants are challenging that because they're doing it in a different way. And we don't necessarily understand how yet, but the behavioral evidence and the physiological responses that we can measure tell us that they can definitely do. So in a way, the question of whether plants are intelligent or should we explore the intelligence of plants, it's kind of like a mute question. Because it's like, but of course they are intelligent. How can anybody be here without being able to remember, learn, make decision? You wouldn't survive very long. Actually, you wouldn't survive at all. And if we remember that plants have been on a long evolutionary timescale, plants have been here way before us. They've been finding very intelligent solutions to some serious challenges, and they're still here. So obviously there is something that they're doing that is very right.
Mm-hmm. Your comment about the anthropocentrism that sort of leads the debate against the legitimacy of plant intelligence reminds me, or sort of brings me into the second question that I had for you, which is about how in the opening chapter of your book, you talk about a shift for yourself, where it was a shift about how you were relating to that which you were researching, that led you to feeling as though you could no longer participate in the type of, I'll just say, like, cold-hearted, objective manipulation of the object of your study that was required of you in order to sort of like continue in the field that you were in, which eventually led you into plant intelligence, plant cognition, maybe not the best words, maybe not the accurate terms that you're using in your field. I'm wondering, can you tell us about the mindset shift that you underwent that led you into the field of plant intelligence, and what it was about the then and likely still prevailing paradigm of modern science that hindered the recognition of the work that you have since accomplished in that field?
Thank you. Wow. So I should start from saying that I am very grateful for the training that I received and the experience that I had to have as a cold-hearted scientist, because that actually allowed me to, in hindsight, of course, I appreciate that. That allows me, one, to still understand how those still involved in that kind of science cannot see some of the things and some of the perspective that others are offering, including myself, which are speaking of into a different way of doing science, a new, I don't like to say a new paradigm, but in a way it's a different kind of science that maybe we won't even call science at the end. But so given my training, I did exactly as we are taught to do, which is looking at animals, plants, like the organism that we are working with in an objective way. Which what it means is like, it means many things. It means that one, what you're looking at is an object. So they don't have any feeling, don't worry about them. And two, that you are actually not part of the picture. You are the independent observer, the objective observer. And the problem is that even within, the hardcore science that actually believes that, if you speak to the scientist as the person, so the human being, they will all, especially if you're working with animals and plants, they will all tell you in their personal little way, not as the scientist, but as the person, that they love their organisms. They find them beautiful. So there is already a problem here, because it's like, how can you love something that is just an object that you're going to then destroy? Mm-hmm. First of all, like if you love something, you don't go and destroy it.
And by
And yet
destroy, because
these,
you mean like in order to study these animals, for example, you study them in the wild, you study them in whatever, and then you capture a bunch of them, take them back, kill them, and dissect them, kind of thing. That's what you mean by
that's
destroy.
right.
Yeah.
That's right. That's right. So literally, you destroy that system. So as you can see, we already, there is almost like a schizophrenia already in there, because it's like we are delusional. We're telling ourselves that we are going to be the objective scientist looking at the object of study. And yet at the same time, we are able to speak of this object as the thing that we love and how beautiful they are, and how much you're learning by observing them and all of that. And so I was in the same place. And when you do your initial training as a scientist, most of us have to go through, the usual prac lab where you are asked to dissect something. And I remember there is always one person in those classes, both as me as the student many years ago, and then as the one that was, supporting other students in these pracs. I remember there is always one person who's like, I don't want to do this. So there is already always an internal conflict that is like, no, this is not right. Why do we need to do this? And then it gets reinforced by the peer pressure. And he's like, but if you want to be a proper scientist, that's what we do. This is part of the training. So then peer pressure, training, so all this conditioning enters into the picture. And before you know it, you don't even feel anymore that there is a paradox, that there is a strange conflict in there, a discomfort that you are feeling but you're suppressing. Now, again, fast forward a few years after my undergrad and all of that, I was doing my PhD. And during that time, I was working with fish because I'm an animal ecologist by training. I was working with coral reef fishes on the Great Barrier Reef. I spent lots of time in the field, observing, capturing, collecting, dissecting, all of those. And I didn't feel anything. Like I was trained, I felt like how beautiful, how lucky I am to be here, how lucky, I love being in the field, I get to see the animals. And then I just, almost like if someone else enters, it's like, now I need to capture them, kill them, dissect them, do my analysis and publish my paper, because that's science. And well, I had this experience in the field with my fish. That was during my first postdoc, and basically I did this long experiment, and I did describe that in the book as well. I did this long experiment in the field, and I was looking at mums and dads, and how they provide for the future, the next generation, and in that process, I had to spend a lot of time every day in the water with these individual animals, and after a while, you get to know each other. Literally, you know the personality of each individual being that you're meeting every day, and kind of like they know you. And they get very comfortable about you. These are wild animals, but they get very comfortable because, like we do with anything, is like they get used to you. So some of these fish would be very happy to just sit in my hand underwater. I would open my hand. They would come sit in my hand. I could even close my hand around them. No problem. This is just Monica. No issue here. And then carry on their life, and I carry on mine. And then at the end of the experiment, of course, as I just explained, we had to go and collect our objects of study. So I felt like I wanted to go in the water and say goodbye to every four, come back in the afternoon and collect them all and do the usual that is expected. And but I couldn't be the same scientist. And I didn't know that until I got in the water. So I went in the water that morning and I wanted to say goodbye. And I didn't have any nets. I didn't have any strange chemicals, nothing. It was just me with my dive gear, diving. And the same individuals that always came every day, all of them that have known me now for months, were all hiding. Nobody was out. And when I tried to, come closer and like, where is such and such and where is that? Nobody. And everyone was hiding under the holes and under the rocks and under the corals. And they were like, this is not good news. And the feeling that I received that arrived to me was this feeling of they know exactly what I'm about. All I had was the thought in my mind that I'm going to come and say goodbye and I will be back this afternoon to kill you all, basically. And I felt like they know. They know. There's nothing about me that is giving me away, but actually they know. And nobody came out in the afternoon, and I felt so horrible. I felt like, oh my God, what am I going to do? And then in the afternoon, I went back and did what I was expected to do. I ripped the places apart, basically, lifting rocks and all sorts of things. And I got all my fish and I dissected them and I got my data and I published the paper. But that was the last time. Because, and it actually took me 10 years to then share for the first time this story. Because, of course, in that moment, I realized that the objects of my study are not objects at all. And of course, I knew that, but there was the conditioned part of me, the trained part of me that was trying to do what the job requires. And then there was the human part of me that's like, we are not doing this anymore. And it was the fish that showed me that. It was the fish that said like, you cannot do this anymore. And we're going to show you now that we know that who do you think you are? What do you think you are? And the reason why I learned later, as I processed this event over the years, I learned that the reason why I went back in the afternoon and collect them all is because, of course, peer pressure, conditioning, and all of that. But also because when we are affected by situation where we feel really guilty of like what we have done, I think most of us freeze. Like literally, we don't know what to do, and the only way I responded was by doing the only thing I knew how to do or what to do, which is the past. You look and it's like, oh, I'll just do that again. And so you can add that guilt. And so the guilt feeds onto itself. And it's a very nice, beautiful thing to do. Not, but that's what we do often, right? And it freezes us, but also I think it gives us energy to change. And so I had to freeze, and that was the experience that I had. And then I had to, in a way, engage with that emotion and change. And the experience actually sat there for a few months. And then I ended up going for a Vipassana retreat. And during the 10 days, I'd done Vipassana before, so I knew what the deal was. But I wasn't expecting that. And so when I sat halfway through, I had a really, really harsh day where I was sitting and I started sobbing, and I sobbed for hours, and I just felt blood dripping off my hands. And the entire question that was going around, although of course Vipassana is about like quieting the mind, but it was actually like, you have no right to take anyone's life, no matter what form of life it is. There is no question that is important enough, big enough, critical enough, whatever enough that would justify that act from you. And so after that Vipassana, my initial compromise was like, okay, I'm going to go vegetarian so that I don't have to be part of the killing of animals on my behalf. And that was an initial compromise. And literally, I was born in Italy, and meat and that kind of cuisine is been part of my upbringing, and it's been, even considered like, how else would you eat if we don't eat meat? What do you eat? And I never thought I would become vegetarian, but coming out of Vipassana at that time, it was basically like I didn't have to try. Simply, I just didn't eat any more meat. That was it. And that's when I tried to do my research work with the fish and the animals without killing, and trying to find a new way of doing the same science. But it became very clear very soon that no, that's a requirement. The killing, the taking apart, this dismembering is part of the process. And so if you want to be part of this process, you need to obey by the rules. And if you don't obey the rules, then you can't be in. You can't be in doing this. And so again, another crisis is like full on crazy, like series of crises, because it's like, oh my God, I can't be a scientist anymore. But, that's the thing, is like, then what is science? Like, we had history of, so many scientists, and not all of them pulled things apart. Not all of them were required to do that. This is a very brute and very rough and very kind of unsophisticated way, I think. And when I was trying to do a different way of my science with the animals, and I realized that this is not going very far, I had to also question whether I needed to, let go of the scientist in me. And that's when I started working with the plants in my garden, simply just planting a new garden. And at that point, it became clear, like, you can work with us. You can take a leaf. We don't mind, and we got so much to tell you. And that coincided as well with, an intensification of work with the sort of what we call the plant medicines, and so together, the actual active engagement with a garden, active engagement with a more entheogenic space, and then active engagement of, we need a new science. We need a different science that doesn't work with objects, but it engages and co-creates with subjects. That's when it started arising. But of course, I didn't know that at the time. I was just in my own little crisis, like, what am I going to do? And it's all about me. And it's like, oh no, I'm not going to be able to do this ever again. And who would have suspected that I was about to actually do maybe the most important thing of my career, at least up to this point. And the work with plants became beautiful. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. One of the things that you would mention when you first started with in your book, when you're talking about publishing some of this sort of like different way of doing science around plants, was that you had discovered that plants communicate in a way that doesn't include light or chemicals, and that upon publishing the paper, or attempting to publish the paper, despite sort of the reliability or the legitimacy of what you had sort of discovered, that you came up against a lot of resistance. And one of the things that you got resistance against, if I remember correctly, was that you didn't have an established theory about why and what before, presenting what you discovered, and that you were basically said, well, this isn't good science, or this is not how science is done. You have to have a theory before you do any investigation. And then there was also a sense that maybe that was a way in which it was delegitimizing an inconvenient discovery about plants, for example. Can you talk a little bit about the, again, going back to what you were mentioning before, anthropocentrism, the anthropocentric bias that showed up as a reluctance or a straight up resistance to accepting the legitimacy of your research?
Yeah, well, that was I remember exactly what you're referring to, because it was one of the first papers that I published on plants. And it was one of the first studies. And the reason why I did it was because, for me, the idea that plant communication was actually already a research field was like, oh my God, wow, I didn't know that. And I didn't know anything about plants. So I started reading what was done and being as an animal ecologist, right? So an animal researcher looking in what plant researchers are doing. And it was like, wow, there is all of these chemical communication research done, which is beautiful. Then there is light. Oh, and we know that, if the roots touch each other, they can also share and communicate information. So those three elements, touch, light, and chemical, were, quite well developed. And it was very clear, plants use these senses to communicate. But coming from the animal perspective, like a lot of the work in the animal world is about sound. And I was like, and they haven't looked at the obvious. It's like, well, we are all embedded in sound one way or another. And so why is there nothing on sound? So I started digging, of course. And of course, I ended up in the literature of the 60s, 70s with The Secret Mind of Plants and all of that kind of stuff, which it's a double-edged sword, because it was great that there was someone that already, suggested that. And of course, before them, Darwin himself used to play his oboe or whatever he was playing to his plants, and he was convinced that the plants were listening. So, the fact that modern evolutionary biology was playing music to his plants, I think that there must be something. But again, that was actually it was good to see that, but also was the very problem that I had to face, because science had already discarded that. It already decided that this work wasn't really scientifically done, which I agree. And so, it doesn't have any scientific validity. Like, anybody can say that the plants are listening to music, but this is not science. Where is the science? So it's like, okay, so let's do the science and see what happens. But before I got to that, so I started suspecting that, I started thinking, like, how cool would it be if we find that plants are responding to sound? And it intuitively made sense that they might do. And so I started exploring on two fronts. On one front, I wanted to see what other fields of research and other bodies of knowledge had to say about this, about sound, the relationship between sound and plants. And on the other side, I thought, okay, let's say that it's not sound. It could be anything, actually. What if we block the communication channels that we know plants are using? So the light, the touch, and the chemistry. In theory, if these are the only channels that they're using, there should be no other channels available, and so they won't know who is growing next to them. But if they're using something else, and sound could be one of the vehicles for that communication, then they should be able to talk to each other or communicate and know who is growing next to them without those three channels that we are aware of. And so the experiment was like, I built these matryoshka boxes. And so there was one plant inside a box, and then within that there was another box and other plants around. And the setup was designed so that it would block at different time. There would be no access to light, or access to light but no chemistry, or access to none of them, or different combinations. And what I found, that when I closed all the channels, the three channels that we knew about, the plants still knew exactly what was going on, and they still could tell who was growing next to them. And so how did they know? And that was what disturbed the reviewers of my paper, because usually we start with the question and then we find the answer. That's how we are expected to work. But for me, so the question is the hypothesis, the theory, and then, we go and use that to test. But for me, the question was like, do these channel that we know of for communicating, are they the only way in which plants are communicating? And the design wasn't designed to find anything. It was just to test whether, is there more? But it's so vague, it's so uncomfortable, the idea that there might be more. And if we don't know what that more is, that's not comfortable. The reviewer had the problem. It's like, well, that's all well and good, but what is it? And if you didn't, one of the comments that was made, which is funny, the reviewer accused me of doing this study with no design, and then kind of randomly finding that the plants could do something else, that it wasn't what we already knew. And so then I wrote the paper backwards. It's like, oh, because I found something strange, then I decided to make it as if I already planned it that way. And I was like, oh my God, this is so complicated that I wouldn't be able to design it that way. It's too complicated for me to design it that way. It was much easier to just ask the simple question of, is this all we know? And is this all that is there? And if there is more, can we see it? And even if we don't know what that more is, can we just ask the question of, is there more? Is there something else? So that opened the way for then exploring the question of sound, as like sound could be one of the things that one of the means by which plants could be communicating in these kind of cases. And then, I went on exploring that, which now actually is being taken on by other labs, and I'm very happy about that. And so the question of plant bioacoustics has become kind of like, it's not even a big deal. There is not much, but it's already started. And because several labs now are working on it, it's kind of like, oh yeah, now it's almost mainstream, almost. But at the time, it was very much like, no, come on. Plant sound, that's like the hippie stuff from the Secret Life of Plants. We're doing real science here. And they didn't know where the inspiration was coming from. Otherwise, they probably would have been even harsher. And that's why the book had to wait so long to come out. But of course, at the same time, my inspiration was coming from what I had learned about some of the indigenous practices where sound is a core aspect of the practice of engaging with plants. And, I was super fascinated when I learned about the Icaros from South America. And, but many other cultures have songs that, are used and given from the plants to the human, and they're used for that communication, that relationship to flourish. And of course, they also intrigued me. And as a scientist, I was like, well, what if there is a truth in that? What if when a curandero says, I received a song from the plant and then I use it and that's my healing tool to help other people to heal? What if there is something, because instead of just simply discounting it as like, oh, fanciful stuff, what if there is actually something there that, exactly, what if it's actually, there is sound the plants are emitting, and these people might be simply well attuned to hear it and to feel it and to perceive it. So that's how I ended up in Peru the first time, because I'll have to go and check it myself. Totally not, again, in hindsight, because when it happened, it was through a series of dreams, and I didn't have a particular desire to go to Peru or anything. And then when the series of dreams came through and then I ended up going, I realized, oh my God, I need to have a direct experience of this to know it, so that then that can inform what kind of question I can ask as a scientist in a lab or in a scientific space. And so that's how, there was a back and forth between these different places in the bodies of knowledge that we call for. And I was always very careful to keep the two spaces, the more animistic and more, the more, I guess, indigenous aspect of knowledge and knowing and connecting with plants, with the Western technological, technoscientific aspects of me. And even then, my colleagues, when I started doing the experiment, my colleagues were like, there is something, like, she's doing the experiment following the rules. And for that, I'm very grateful for my training, right? Like, I know what the rules are. I know how to play this game. But it was just, even doing that, they were like, but there is something uncomfortable about her. What is it that, what is it? And they couldn't get it. And so that, I guess, helped me, although it wasn't so pleasant at times.
Well, definitely, pardon me for interjecting, definitely in your book,
no.
You are unabashedly blending the worlds, or representing both sides of your life in that way, and made it very evident, both in storytelling and in reporting on your scientific research, how the two wove together. into each other. And it's interesting talking about sort of the pre-established biases that cultures of science embrace somewhat ideologically and narrow-mindedly, which is sort of really oddly and paradoxically anti-science, is really well exampled, right? It's ironic, yes, exactly. It's it's well represented in the story that you just offered, say around plants. We've already decided that's some hippie shit, like that doesn't fit here in the halls of academia and modern science, but also as well, of course, in psychedelics, because, Leary was obviously a crazy person and all the hippies were taking drugs and doing things that we felt uncomfortable with. And so we're not even allowed to look at these things anymore. And you should be ridiculed right out of your tenure for even thinking that it'd be a good idea to entertain it as anything other than, taboo. But I want to, mixing in with that, is something about, is this like a Bible quote I'm about to say? I don't know, like those with the ears to hear or something like that. Sound, plant bioacoustics, shamanic indigenous communication with plants communicating in general, having memory, being able to learn, as you were inferring, although you didn't explicitly say, I don't think, possessing some type of agentic personhood, self-consciousness, in your chapter, Kernels of Truth, you talk explicitly about voice and what it means to allow plants a voice, how we silence them, and why we, as the sort of dominant culture of the modern Western world, why we silence them. And that was one of my favorite parts of the book, although there were a number. And I wonder if you could unpack that a little bit here in the context of what we've been talking about so far.
Yeah, that's something that is actually very dear to me as a space, because and because you mentioned the psychedelic science, I like to start from there. I'm watching very closely what's happening in this area. And in particular, how there is this revival now of all the psychedelics, and how we can, use them to heal people with traumatic stress disorders or whatever, depression or whatever, which is great, of course. But there is a big but for me, because there is a real danger I see that we just end up doing what we've done already with everything else. And, when we started doing the genetically modified plants, it was to feed the world. So it looks like the intent is of goodwill and love and care. But first of all, this is such anthropocentric perspective. It's like, we're going to use whatever we can and whatever we have for us to feed our world, not the world, our world, the human world. And if this comes to the cost of the rest of the world, from the non-human component of the world, we don't care. So GM technology, for example, ended up being not such a great idea, because and as a scientist, again, I know that the question in itself is very emotionally loaded, but as a scientist, it's like, GM technology is based on objectifying plants. It's literally, some of the technology is designed to silence certain genes so that they don't express certain aspects of who they are. And then we grow them in monoculture, which means that they can't communicate with the diversity of plants that they would normally communicate with. And we have seen over the years that some plants are losing their communicative abilities, which actually allows them to be strong plants. Some plants are not able to release the right amount or the right quality of volatiles that would, for example, prevent a pest attack. So we are creating a system, by silencing the system, we are creating a system that is not as strong and not as vibrant. And So I'm using this as an example because I sometimes I think about the psychedelic space in a similar way. And I'm like, are we just, creating yet another monster where the plants are going to have to serve us for what we need? And we're just going to commercialize everything and make sure that it's all, privately owned, and nobody owns anything. Nobody owns the plant, and the plants own only to themselves. And by extracting chemicals, we're not talking about honoring the being. We are just talking about chemicals, and so yeah, in that sense, it's a strange space, and I don't want to be hypercritical, but I do feel a sense of anxiety around this because from my perspective, what the world needs, at least what I try to instill in my word, is create or support and nurture and care for a space that allows expression. Because life, again, going back to the science of it, life thrives on diversity. That's why we're so obsessed as well. We understand that biodiversity is such an important thing because diversity is the key for a strong system. And when you have a diverse system, it is also more resilient to anything that arrives. So that, you have a disaster like here we have fires, and if you have a really bad fire, you might lose a big chunk of your forest. But if you have diversity, there is a high chance that there will be some of those that can return and reestablish the space for more forests to come. But if you have just one monoculture and that goes, that's it. It's done. It's finished. So the diversity, or allowing for as much diversity to express itself, is actually a strength, is how the system works. And that is also, at the connecting with the concept of the voice, is like, we haven't even started listening. And I'm talking we as the Western world. We haven't even started listening to what these others have to say and can teach us and can support us with. And all we have seen is materials that we can use. And we have been doing that, and we are really good at that. But my experience, and I know it's not just my experience, is that these are very wise elders. The plants in particular, the plant world has so much to give that is not just about the materials, although they do give that so abundantly anyway. But yeah, there is the knowing, is the wisdom that is embedded and encoded and thriving in this being that we are going to lose, and it's probably the most important heritage that we're going to lose. So for me, giving voice means allow for diversity to thrive, and allow for, everybody to come and express themselves in a way that respects everyone else. And I'm thinking just now, as I say this, I'm thinking about weeds. Because but what about the weeds? They take over and all of that. Usually weeds take over when you have a disturbed environment.
Mm-hmm.
And often
they're healing
weeds
the soil,
are able,
generally.
That's right, are able to recreate a space for the biodiversity to eventually return.
Mm-hmm.
So, but there is a very good example that I can give from my own personal experience from last year with COVID. I was in the US, and I just returned just when COVID was going crazy in the US. And by the time I returned home, I got sick. And so I was in quarantine, and I couldn't go anywhere, of course. And I was actually quite sick, and I was just trying to do the best I could to go through the experience. And I was looking around my house, and of course, lots of weeds started to grow. And there was one in particular, which it's ironically called the farmer's friend here, but actually farmers hate it because when it grows everywhere, and they can't stand it. And it was growing everywhere, but in big stacks around my house. And I just started observing first. And then I was like, And I tried a leaf. I was like, peppery, a little bit like, rockets or arugula, could be okay. And then I did a quick search and antiviral, strong antiviral. So I started I couldn't go anywhere. So I started making soup, pesto, all sorts of salads with this weed. It was amazing. And I still use it now. And every so often when it's a flu time or when people, those time of the year when people get sick more easily, this weed seems to just go rampant. And I'm like, excellent, thank you very much. Come here, I'll put you in my pumpkin soup. And I have done this before when sometimes we gather and we have a fire and the soup comes out and what is that? There is something really yummy in this soup. What is it? And he's like, yeah, that's the farmer's friend. And I'm using this example because, this is a weed, or supposedly. Again, a very anthropocentric way of describing a plant. It's like it's a weed because it doesn't suit our own needs, and therefore this plant is unwanted. But here is a plant that I'm supposed to hate. I'm supposed to dislike. I'm supposed to rip apart and take it away because it's not your place. And instead, I have learned to appreciate what it's doing for obviously, creating a good space for other plants, but also for me and for the people around me. And so suddenly by allowing this plant to express itself and allow it to, do the flowering and do whatever it needs to do. So allowing it to have voice. What I'm learning is that in doing that, I've been supported. So we are actually being nourished and cared for by a plant that supposedly is not supposed to be there. And instead is like, no, I have come because I have something to deliver for you. And because I have noticed some weeds, some years just disappear. And you're like, wow, we used to have lots of these and now it's gone. And I do have plants which I have tried to grow. And nope. Not for you. You don't need me. So I'm not coming here. I'm not growing here. And these are plants that, people, when I tell them that I can't grow rosemary, they're like, what do you mean? Rosemary is like a pest. And it's like, yeah, I know. Me and rosemary, we don't get along, and I love rosemary, but it's just like, I had to go steal it from someone else's bushes when I need it,
Yeah.
So but that's, again, is like allowing for plants to, or anybody, any form, to be and express themselves for who they are and what they are, because we actually don't know them. And by getting to know them, we might find that there are beautiful relationships and beautiful things to learn that can really support us and finding solution that otherwise we can't see. And in this case was I'm an antiviral. And if you have COVID, I'm going to give you a big boost for your immune system and help you get rid of that. And, we are going straight for the things that we already know and build on what we already know. And we are not allowing other voices to tell us. And what that to me is a sign of a lack of humbleness in our, current model of thinking, because you need to be humble to realize that you don't know anything and to realize that others can teach you something pretty important, pretty good. And these others don't have to be humans. And in this case, for me, it's very clear. Like most of the people that I get teaching from are not humans.
There's a couple things you said there that I want to speak to, and one of the things is talking about allowing it to have a voice, say by allowing the plant to just do its thing, right? But then there's the allowing it to have a voice in yourself by practicing listening. It's not that I grant this thing the power of voice, it's that I allow it to have a voice by setting myself up to hear the voice of it. It's not that I am granting it the power, it's that I'm positioning myself. Right. I'm orienting myself receptively to hear, which is what I kind of meant with those who have the ears to hear. And
That's right.
And what was the other thing? When you were talking about psychedelics, I thought that was really interesting, because I was reading today, rereading an article from Dimitri something, can't remember his last name, and Jonathan Dickinson, and they were talking about there was some talk there about, you know, modern Western psychiatry's sort of like rampant adoption of psychedelic medicine to treat the sickness, like the diseases of mental health. Now we have a cure, and just all the issues present in the sort of like paradigmatic background of those propositions. And one of them was something akin to, in some sense, what we're talking about is really a type of appropriation of plants by,
That's it.
and I've heard
That's right.
Geronimo MM from iSeers talk about this, about, you know, just taking the plant, completely divorcing it from its cultural context, and then applying it in whatever way we feel is appropriate, often to the result of unintended consequences that are generally more harm than good. The sort of like the cultural parameters that kept its usage and its place in a culture in a good way, which is usually hard earned over time, are gone. And so, you know, like calamity ensues, maybe a bit extreme, but sometimes not. And but one of the things that article didn't speak to, which I think speaks to what you're talking about here, is how there's a silencing happening, not of the indigenous cultural context, as not just of that. And it has to do with the silencing of the fact that these things come from something, that psilocybin comes from a mushroom, you know, or DMT comes from basically every plant, but like they come from something. And that the cultural narrative, the story space around these things now is sort of taking away the capacity to recognize that there is a there there. There's an other there. I gave a talk on this a while back about the intelligent presence of psilocybin. And I think about Derek Jensen, who I understand is sort of a maligned character in some sense because of some controversies with transgender stuff, and fair enough from what I understand. But he had this comment about how the first thing we do to exploit someone is to take away its voice. And culturally, you know, from like a basic foundations of what is real or isn't real, we've taken, there's a question coming, I promise. We take away the voice of the plants and of the animals and of the whatever, because then we can exploit them. And one of the ways in which we exploit them is say bioprivacy, bioprospecting. And speaking of, you know, plants who we take away their voice, silence them genetically and otherwise in order to monocrop them. In your book, you talk about plants like oats, wheat, soy, and pine as slavery crops on production lines. And you write, quote, "The cultural construction of plants as objects becomes an indispensable distortion to support the utilitarian exploitation and monopolization of these vegetal beings as, quote, resources, and to justify our misappropriation and misuse of the knowledge they have brought to humanity." So can you unpack that a little bit more in the context of what we're talking about, and weave in maybe any recent events that you feel are relevant examples of this?
Thank you. It's like, whoa. No, beautiful. Yes, so many points as well from your sharing. That is like, okay, I need to focus.
Sorry about that.
No, don't be sorry. It was beautiful. I really, it resonated as well. So, I guess one correction first, that we are appropriating from someone, not something. And the language that we use is already being colonized. And that is the first step. And that's why when I speak of plants, even I am not quite sure. I think some people, when I do interviews or when I present my work, I speak of my plants as a she or as a he. And people, so I'm sure that some people think like, she's not a native English speaker, so she doesn't know. It should be it. And instead, no, it's I'm purposely using the language to describe a someone, no, a something. And so, because that slight shift into recognizing a someone already allows you to at least take one moment extra before you take something from someone. And I guess with the major food crops, as we call them, not like plants, but crops, even there, it's the same that they do with the steak.
Mm-hmm.
It's not
a cow, it's beef. It's not a chicken, it's beef, poultry. Yeah.
That's right. It's the same. We're using language. Language is weaponized to create this distortion, this illusion that no, don't worry, you're not doing anything wrong. You're just, eating crops or eating beef. And for the plants, I actually just more recently wrote a piece on wheat. And so maybe I'll talk about wheat as an example of these plants. But here is a plant that actually has become relatively toxic to us in many ways, like physiologically toxic, but also at the geopolitical level, very toxic. I mean, the French tried to, when they invaded and colonized Southeast Asia, Cambodia and Vietnam, they tried to replace the wheat in France with rice. Again, another crop that is colonized. And in a way, the wheat plants had already put its roots so deeply into the mind of the French that there was no way, But what wheat came to represent in the French culture was a status. The rice is for poor people, for those people over there in the who knows where, so far away that we don't know, Southeast Asia. And the wheat is for us, evolved and, progressive cultures. And so the French government really tried, because rice would have been much cheaper. And it would have been a perfect way to bond, the geopolitical situation. But the French never took up the rice. And wheat was the main staple. And still, of course, we all know the French as baguettes and patisseries and all of that kind of stuff. So this is just a little example to show how wheat in particular was a plant that actually in its origin was not of interest. It was the original wheat was not a plant that we would have ever chosen to eat, except that we cultured it, and eventually without understanding, I don't think, we became enslaved by our own practice of this plant, because wheat requires care, and the more care you need to give it, the more care it requires. And so suddenly we were enslaved by our choices of which plant we were going to engage with, without understanding that I don't think we ever bothered asking the plant whether, would you think, would you mind, would you mind collaborating? Maybe wheat would have said no. Maybe wheat wouldn't have been the plant to go for. And maybe the geopolitical situation in the world would have been very different. There'd been wars because of wheat. And I just feel like there is no space for in the context of, for example, a war, for this third party, in this case would have been a plant, to express what his point of view is, what her point of view is, what her perspective is, what does this plant want to do? Does this plant want to be cultivated en masse everywhere? is that what he wants? Because actually, the plant itself, because of that, has lost a lot of its original potency. And then it has become a plant that needed so much of our support, apparently, that it needed us to modify her, eventually genetically as well. But the original grass, because wheat is basically like a grass, was doing just fine as it was on his own, doing a thing. So there are lots of plants that we have, in a way, captured without asking whether this is a relationship that we are both engaging in and we are happy to engage in. And like in any of those system of appropriations, eventually the system stops working. And so what we have learned to do is to force it into working. But the more you do that, the less recognition of who is there, who is the other involved, it's available. And in the context of the psychedelics, I think that this is the danger, that, we're going to forget that actually, have we asked, the mushrooms if they're really happy to collaborate as we envision them collaborating with us? Maybe they're happy with us to collaborate, but there's some things that, no, we don't want to do that.
Maybe they're down to rock with Oregon, but they're not so stoked on Compass Pathways or something. Yeah,
exactly. It's like, we haven't asked them, or have we? And what if? So sorry, I'm just going a bit in strange directions, but
go for it.
It's quite simple, actually. What if we were to engage with these others as we do, when we are starting a new business adventure? We call our business partners, we have a meeting, and we meet at the boardroom, and everyone has a say about what is their agenda and what it is that they see coming out of this potential joint venture. What if the plants were given a space on that table, not as the resource that is going to be used, but as one of the participants? And an example that I can provide from my own experience as the scientist, I was running an experiment here, where I am now, where I'm living now, and the experiment was very simple. It was about peas and choice behavior, and the experiment was set up, and the setup looked beautiful, and it was supposed to be working perfectly, and it was working perfectly. The only problem was that the peas had decided that they were going to make a choice that wasn't the one that I was expecting. That's not so much of a problem unless it is a choice that all of the peas are making together. So it's a collective choice. There was something in the space that the peas had tuned in and they were interested in, but it wasn't for me to know what that thing was. So in my experiment, I was given a particular cue, which was sound. And I know that they like that cue from previous work that I've done, but it didn't matter where I put that cue. The peas would always direct themselves and their roots in a particular direction in the space, in the actual lab, which was like, what's there? What are they looking for? So if it was just random, then nobody actually knows what it's doing and they're going in all directions is one thing. But for all of the peas to ignore me, basically, the stimulus that I put in the system, and just like, no, we're all interested in going left. And you're like, what's left? So what happened in the system is that at the beginning, I felt like I don't understand. I don't know how to change this experiment. I am failing. I. And then it occurred to me that the only way out, because I couldn't tell what it was that they were interested in. And it could be an infinite amount of possibilities. So there is no way that I can try to work out one by one. So that became obvious straight away. So the only way was, okay, so instead of like, how do I run this experiment? What if you, as the P, tell me, what is it that you want? And how about we do this experiment? And what happened was that not only the experimental setup changed and he evolved several times, but then he actually got out of that room and I ended up building a greenhouse outside The peas went outside. The experimental setup changed yet once again. And then finally, it's like, oh, okay, so this is actually the experiment that we are doing, which is not very, very different from the original idea, but actually is totally different. Because suddenly it wasn't me, the scientist, running the experiment and achieving a particular goal, and that is for the benefit of science. But it was we as the collective, which includes the peas, myself, the space, the material even that we are using, because all the materials also change. So the entire apparatus, it's what we are. The we includes all of these. And this collective is working together to find the way to what is it that we actually need to do. And eventually we got to a place as a collective where the experiment is working and is undergoing. And I literally feel like I didn't design this. We designed this. This experiment, I wasn't gonna do this. We are co-creating this, and it's working while the thing that I wanted to do wasn't working. So I'm using this just as an example that I think is actually really possible to, when I say to listen to these voices and collaborate and be literally a collective rather than, the human deciding for everyone else and not taking in account literally the perspective of others in that conversation and in that creation of the space. It's possible. It's totally possible. If a scientist can do it, many other systems can do it, because science is already so rigid that, if we can do it in a system that's got so many very strict rules, many other systems can do it. But as you pointed out correctly, it's like, do we have the ears to listen? And not just ears, but also the willingness, the heart to listen. And maybe this is really, at the end of the day, that is the crux of the matter. It's like, are we going to start listening with our hearts, or are we keep re-vomiting back and back again what we already know from our minds, who can only tell us what we already done? So, and it can only base and be inspired by what it already knows. And it's like, we don't need the past, we need the future. And the heart can really, that center space can really allow for those voices to speak. And I think that this is how ultimately, for many of us, participating in the work with the psychedelics, at the end, this is where how many times have we heard like, oh, the heart space, I felt so open. It's like, yeah, that's right. And oh, so much inspiration. I got so many ideas. I've been painting, I've been playing music, because that is the space where this diversity arises from. And there is an openness that allows for the listening, embracing, co-creating that I think I'm talking about. I don't know.
A couple things came up for me that were almost bottlenecked, and they were at odds with each other. One of which was like, I'm just going to say it straight out, but it comes from a very respectful place. Okay. What the fuck is she talking about? Like how, like we've got stuff to do. Like talk to a plant. Like A, what? B, of course, but how the fuck do we, excuse my language, but this is like the level of confusion that I have, like how do we even know that we're talking to a plant? And why in the hell would I trust a person who told me that they plant told them that, especially if they're a person high enough up to be making big, financial governmental decisions? I don't trust those people generally anyways, and then another part of me was like, how do I do it? I want to learn. This sounds great. So it's like all of these things all at once. So when you started explaining even the change in your experimental process, I was like, oh, thank God, an example. I can root myself in something. But even that still, like, I don't fully understand. The only thing I can really, maybe I've grokked some part of it, maybe not, which is like, it just seems something like slowing down a little bit. Mm-hmm. It's like slowing down enough so to like you said, to open your heart to listen and going from there, rather than being like, this thing didn't work and now this has to work and it's got to work and it's got to be like this, because if I don't, then I won't this, and then that won't happen, and then it's all about me, and so you got to do it like this, blah blah blah. So something like slowing down was the most that I get out of that, and like listening, and maybe that's the start. And I give you space to comment on this, but then also there's another question. It's like, maybe there's something else that can allow us to communicate too, which you talk about in your book, which is utilizing entheogenic plants, ceremony, dreaming, and ritual. So if you did you want to speak a little bit to what I just said there about slowing down before I ask you this question explicitly about psychedelics?
Yeah, otherwise it's just like, okay, too big. Sure. But okay, so mission accomplished. If you feel very confused, yes. Because no, that's exactly the point. Because you see, my job is to be clear, right? And to, share clearly. But at some point, there are also places where things become clear only when it's time. And I'm not trying to bypass, But there is a level of being comfortable with the discomfort of not knowing what's going on, basically. And when I was in my lab, I had exactly what you just described in my own, in my own story, but I had exactly said, no, but wait, but no, but how can it be blah, 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 blah. And the mind is trying so hard to make sense of what's going on and what's not working and how I make it work and how do I do it. And which, as you can see, even the words are like fast and sharp and cutting. And there is no space. They're just like this, ta, 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 instead of So the paradox is exactly between these two moments. There is that ta, 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 and then there is the, and I try to sit right there in the middle. And over time, I'm learning to become more and more comfortable in sitting in that middle space. Because you're right. You're totally right. If I just sit in and now I'm just going to carry on and meditate all day, it's like, great. I'm sure it's good, But action, this place is a place of action as well, of movement. So how do we combine the more contemplative aspect of ourselves, which is the one that meditates and is very centered all the time, sitting on the mat or whatever, with, there is something to be built here. There is something to be done here. There are big world decisions to be made. How do we make those? Well, it's by bringing those two together, I think, that we find the solution. And I wouldn't trust the big guys, because I'm mostly guys, that are making the big financial decision up top at all either. But why? Simply because their decisions are coming from only one place, that is the ta-ta-ta-ta-ta. And there is no space for the other part to come in, because when that part is in, we can feel it. And that is the part that allow for the voice of the one that is making the decision. It's got different tone, it's got different texture. And we are very tuned in as humans, we are very tuned in to recognize those voices. And those are usually the people like, is or she is so inspiring. I can feel their presence. Of course, that we are geared, we are tuned for that. So I think that the discomfort of feeling the confusion on one side and then it's perfect, because it's about bringing those two and finding that space in the middle where you sit with both of them ready to do their job. And so in another way of saying this would be, we have beautiful minds, but it's the heart that should inspire the mind for action rather than the mind just deciding what action is required. And when I find myself, for example, often when I have big decision to make, I can make a total mess if and now I'm going to think about it and I'm going to find a solution to this. And then eventually I had to surrender. And when I surrender, and I literally asked my heart, is like, what is the best thing to do in this circumstance that actually is the best for everyone involved, or for the situation, so that it's the best outcome for everything. And my heart often comes out with very simple, like a one word or like a very simple thing. And then my mind can take that and make it into action. And because we have brilliant minds that want to play, it's perfect, because I give my mind something good to play with, instead of something that when she's bored, she just come up with things that, don't make any sense, and then pretend that they are very sensible. And it's the internal conflict between those two parts of us, I think, that can grind us. And but maybe this is exactly why there has been, this resurgence and this reevaluation of the psychedelics, because there are spaces where for a little moment we can remember what these other part is, so that then when we go back into the world of the mind, we're like, oh, but I had this heart opening weekend and it was so beautiful and I feel so inspired to love everyone and be a good person. And then what that is like, okay, you just sat in ceremony, you were inspired and learned something. Now take that lesson and apply it in this material world. Otherwise, you're wasting your time.
Mm-hmm. Wasting our
time. Or maybe
time.
that leads to...
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
that's right.
So speaking on psychedelics and on communicating with plants, your book, Thus Spoke the Plant, it explores, like you had talked about earlier, you had these two sort of sides of your life. You had sort of the indigenous shamanic explorations you were on, and then you had the sort of like clean shirt scientist life or whatever. And that you weave them really well in the book, which means as you're presenting your scientific research that you did and the evidence that you have for plant intelligence and communication, you're also exploring your personal journey with coming to like know plants through a kind of spiritual communion with their intelligences, where the voice of the plants communicate to you through dreams, synchronicities, and visions in ceremony. What role, or perhaps necessity, do you see altered states of consciousness play in communicating with and perhaps learning from plants?
Mm-hmm. Well, we are in altered states all the time. For anybody that drinks coffee, well, enjoy that trip. And for anybody who likes their chilies in their food, enjoy that trip. And if you eat bananas, avocados, take whatever you like, basically, you're always being altered. And what I'm talking here to is that until we are so attached to a particular state that we consider the norm, the normality, the reality, then we are always going to see these other states, and therefore the psychedelic experience as states that are out of the normal, out of reality. And I think for myself, the two are just a continuum. So there is no two; they're just a continuum. And in that sense, then, even just this morning, I asked a plant who said recently, a plant said to me, whenever you need my help, you just call me and I'll be there. And so this morning I needed some help, and I just sat there quietly, and I literally inside me, I just said, like, you said that if I needed help, I just had to call you. So where are you? And as soon as that thought was expressed in my head, I felt this real sense of calm. Like I was suddenly calm. And I knew that that's what I actually needed. And the plant was delivering exactly what had promised. It's like, I'll be there. It doesn't mean like, and now we can have a chat again. I'll be there means that I will deliver what it is that you need. The same way as if I'm, I'm really tired and I need to drive and I need a coffee so that I can stay awake. I take the cup of coffee and the coffee is like, I'll be there and I'll deliver what you need. But it's, so the psychedelic experience, it's happening all the time. It's just that we have compartmentalized a certain kind of experience that we think is, for some people, very special. Some people have described it as sacred. But it's like, but reality is like that all of those experiences, all of it, like the cup of coffee is as special as the cup that you drink in a ceremony. And the banana that I'm eating and the food that I'm eating every day is as altering as San Pedro and ayahuasca. It's just that is how fine can I tune this system to recognize that, and in that recognition there is also a less how to say. I think that recognition dissipates the neediness that sometimes I've seen in those spaces, or like, I need to drink ayahuasca to know what I'm going to do with my life. I need to have this psychedelic experience so that I can be a better person. No, you don't need anything. You can, all those experiences are, at least for me, are just little training grounds to just remind you that you are always immersed in this psychedelic. The entire thing is a psychedelic experience, and you're just waking and waking up from one dream and dreaming up another one every moment, and it's the recognition of that. So at one level, I'm very grateful, and I think psychedelic experiences, as we call them, are very important because they do allow us to train this instrument to feel. And some of us have been so conditioned that we can't feel anything. So to even feel something is already amazing. But that something is not something that is not you, separate from you, and then you carry on with your normal life. It's like that something is just showing you who is there and what is this instrument. And then it's the practice, and it's connected with what we were saying before about like, there are action to be taken. You don't just sit there and say, oh, now, excellent, I've seen the meaning of the universe and I found the center of the galaxy and I was there with the stars, how beautiful. It's like, yeah, but unless you bring that to the world, then what are we doing? What are we doing? And again, there is another paradox here, because as I'm saying, but it's all a psychedelic experience, so who cares? Doesn't matter. And yet it's like, yeah, but while you're dreaming this, why not have the best dream possible? I mean, you can choose a shitty dream if you want to and go for it. And we have chosen one that is, borderline shitty at times, but as a collective, I'm speaking, but we can also create like the most beautiful world that we could wish for can be just done now, but literally, because we can change this dream now, but there are action to be taken. We need to, a house, when you build a house, you need to first dream it up and you can see, and it's going to be beautiful. And then you actually need to get your hands dirty and put the materials, literally the material world together for that dream to become something in this reality. And even with that is also working with the material. The dream itself is changing, and the house in the end might be something else, but is the process of engaging with those parts, all of those parts, that brings you to the final goal, which is not a goal at all, but is just, and then there is another dream. And I'm saying this because right now I'm in the process of, I've been in this beautiful home for 2 years, and then suddenly became clear I need to move. I have to move, time. And I had to feel a bit of anxiety, grief, all of those emotions. And then also the excitement is like, oh, wow, this last dream that I just had was amazing. And now I just, that dream is finished and I'm dreaming something new. And I'm anxious only because I can't see the new dream yet, but it's going to be amazing. It's just another dream. And without that understanding, I could just dwell into my anxiety and feel a victim of my world and feel like how horrible my life is, that now I have to move and all of that kind of stuff. And who knows, maybe I don't find a home and maybe, it's going to be horrible, whatever. And so the psychedelic experience, as we describe it, I think can provide us a space to remember who we are. But then we had to enact that. Otherwise, it's just a nice, fancy thing to do. And it's quite fashionable at the moment, it seems. So it's like, go for it. But, yeah.
Thank you. I
don't know if he answered any of your questions, actually. But
you definitely answered a question I didn't intend to ask, but I appreciated it. I want to ask this particular question again, and maybe actually I missed the answer, which is also quite possible. Which is thinking about specifically communicating with plants. Or receiving messages from plants. In your book, you talk quite a bit about, you communicating with them through visions brought on by ceremonies. And I don't just mean ceremonies like you took a psychedelic plant, but ceremonies where you did dietas, a special type of ayahuasca diet where is it vegetalismo diet or there's a number of maybe traditions there where you isolate and you diet almost explicitly on one particular plant and commune with it. My question is how much is that dreaming place, that visionary place, necessary for communicating with and even learning from plants as someone's?
Mm-hmm. Well, I've done several dietas, and for me, I guess it's a space that I'm very comfortable in because, I get to know it every time a little bit more, and so it would be tempting for me to say, oh, you just need to do this and you will know what I'm talking about. But of course, it's a very personal experience. So what I can say is that I had the honor to facilitate a similar experience for someone else last year. This person came and she wanted to look at certain issues in her life, and she felt like that was maybe something that could help her. So like, I've never done this for someone else. I know how to do it for myself, but it's not, but sure, I can support for that. So, and it was interesting to watch because, the same issues, different context, different story, but the core same issue that I've experienced before during the dieta, the same kind of like, mind chatter, the same question that arise, existential question, the same stuff came up for her. Of course, custom made for her story, but it was the same. And it was very easy for me to say, oh yeah, I know that. I know that because I know it. I had to experience it myself. I know where you are, in what place you are. And I also can tell you that it's going to pass and you'll be okay, And so, that space of vision, I think, although it's going to be custom made for each one of us, which is amazing in itself, it's not something special that is only for some people. I think it is for anybody who is honestly wanting to know, honestly wanting to connect, honestly wanting to learn. And, I have done dietas, for example, where ayahuasca was not involved. And it was like, several weeks of just one plant. And that plant wasn't even considered officially a psychedelic either. So, but it was plenty of sharing and plenty of vision and plenty of work. And so I guess the dieta, for example, as a process is a very precious process, because aside from the experience itself, or like, oh, I got this vision or that vision, it's a beautiful opportunity for the individual, so at the personal level, to build a relationship that is very intimate with this other. And so then you will be hearing or feeling exactly what it is that you are meant to hear and feel. And I know that in this context with this friend, is like, I remember one day during the dieta, she was like, oh my God, I know what you mean. I now understand what you mean. And it doesn't mean that she had exactly the same experience, but in the sense like, oh, maybe she didn't hear as I heard, or she didn't see as I saw, but she saw in her way and she heard in her way. And in the end, she could report back by saying, I know it here. I know it inside. I understand this. And so the dieta for me is very special, because it is a portal, it is a door that allows for, no matter whether you consider yourself highly visionary or dreamy or not, it allows for slowing down, as you mentioned earlier on, silent listening, and then the space for sharing between different two in this case two different beings, the one that we call the human and the plant. But so again, I'm not sure if I'm answering your question, but
well, I think what I got out of that was, the question was something like, how necessary is it for communicating with plants? But hearing what you just said and learning, and hearing what you just said and hearing what you were speaking about earlier when you were talking about, getting into a relationship with the peas and building your research together, is that, no, it's not necessary to do dietas or deep ceremony or have these vision quests in order to communicate or learn with the plants. And these particular practices can help create in a space of intense, like in a specific space, time and mindset wise, a deeply personal and intimate relationship can be forged and established, which can add to the larger relationship over time, that communication, that learning, that relationship, but is not necessary for the establishment or practice of. Does that feel like I got a fair sense of it?
Yeah. Yeah, that's right. And I guess what I would add is like, they are very precious practices, and like anything else, they're just training wheels. So you might not have to train that way to arrive in exactly the same place. I know for myself that the other day, my toilet is outside. It's a composting toilet, and it's got a door that closes, but not really. It's made of bamboo, so you can see through as you are sitting on your toilet.
Yeah.
And because of the weather, the door wasn't closed properly. So there was a little gap and I could see outside. And this little bird sat just outside, and I knew it was watching me while I'm doing my pee. And I'm watching him. And he started looking and then jumped off and then came back. And it was very active, and I was observing, and I know I was being observed. And so there was a sharing happening right there. And then I thought, what do you want? What are you coming here to say? What is it that you are here for? Have you got something to share? And he kept going up and down, up and down, up and down. And then I finished my thing, went inside and thought, okay, let me check who this bird is. What is his message? And when I looked, so, I could have asked the bird itself, or I can go and use Google, or I can go. So in a sense, like whatever tools we have to get to the same place, it doesn't really matter. So whether it's a dieta, whether it's the toilet, it doesn't matter. Toilets and shower apparently for many people are a good place for inspiration. They are definitely for me. So I recommend them highly. And because you're using them every day, you can get daily inspiration. But what happened is that when I went inside and I checked in the book, that particular bird, the symbol for that particular bird is actually forward movement. And it's interesting for me, it was perfectly timed. And I really felt like this bird kept like moving around and jumping around. And I was like, what are you trying to say? And it was a time where I was riddled with this anxiety of the idea that, of the recognition that I had to move from this place and find a new home. And so when I read that, I had this sense of like, forward movement. It's simply forward movement. That's all it is. Why am I anxious about simple forward movement? So while I'm sitting, so I'm like still on the toilet, here is a little bird that comes and is reminding me with his presence and its own movement that what I'm going through is simple forward movement. I didn't need to do a dieta for that. I didn't need to do any strange psychedelic, whatever. I didn't need to even grab a drum, nothing. I just needed to sit on the toilet. So, but because I think of the work that I've done before, then these experiences become more noticeable and I'm paying attention. And I think that this maybe is, for me, seems to be like, for my experience, has been the most important role from the psychedelic experiences that I had, that they have taught me to pay attention and be, being observant of everything that is happening around me and the things that are approaching me, who is approaching, and what is this one delivering? Because everything is approaching me all the time. So, but another rant.
Sorry to interrupt. Go ahead.
No, another rant about toilets. Sorry.
Well, I mean, they are very important and special things for us, and most of us have weird, complicated relationships with them. What you were saying reminded me of something that I had come to understand, coming to understand, or coming to grok, maybe understand has a orientational element to it that I am not wanting to embrace here, but something I'm coming to grok more over time, which is the concept of animal medicine and what medicine means. Because in my mind, medicine is the thing that gives me the thing that I take that has a result ultimately, and increasingly more so is more recognizing sort of the larger experiential and possibly in synchronicity, but the larger sort of experiential, momentary touchings of something that happen to be exactly what you need, and that upon a deeper sort of investigation of or embrace of, there's a lesson or a direction or an insight or a recognition that can arise or can come into view or be heard, and that medicine, maybe in the sense of animal medicine, is something closer to that, perhaps, than closer to that which comes in a tablet form. So yeah, that came up for me. We're coming to the end here, and I feel like a nice way to close, because I've felt it sort of like sewn in between and throughout the conversation, and this is predicated on the assumption that you perhaps have a copy of your book nearby that you would be willing to read out of by chance.
Just a second.
Yeah, no problem.
All right.
Okay, so
am I reading from somewhere?
Yes, very much so. Starting with chapter 1, word 1, I'd like you to read the entire book. No, I'm just kidding. So, as a way to sort of bring this into close. Now, at the beginning of each chapter, you had like a poem. And at the beginning of chapter N, which I thought was an interesting choice to use non-alphabetically sequential letters rather than numbers as chapters. The chapter Something to Remember, the poem there really struck me. I thought it was really beautiful. And maybe to close out the interview, you can read that poem. And to your preference, you can either say a little something about it, or you can just let it ring out for a moment or two, and then offer us where we can follow more about your work.
Just, I should say that writing that is in all the chapters, that is not mine.
Oh.
It's directly from the plants.
That makes sense, because right at I think it was your introduction, like this is not a human, conceptualizing a mental representation of a something that they think to be, or something along those lines. This is
That's
direct,
right.
Straight from. Okay, that's cool. Yeah. I didn't catch
all
that.
Of those, yeah, all of those are directly from the plants, and so the one that you are mentioning is this. Appreciation and gratitude create beauty. Gratitude, transcended, is joy. Pure joy heals the world.
Okay.
Yeah, good point.
Yeah.
Good points.
So, where can people learn more about your work? Where can they access your book? Where can they follow you as a person of science and wonder doing things in the world?
Well, I guess my work, I try to keep it up to date as much as I can, is on my website. So it's www.monicagagliano.com. I guess the usual suspect, like Facebook and Twitter. I do have an Instagram account, but I'm really bad with it because I just forget that I need to kind of put stuff on this. So, and the book is available pretty much everywhere. And it's actually just yesterday came out in French as well. And so there is obviously the English version, which is the original, but then there is a Spanish, a Dutch, and a French translation. And it's interesting enough because the French translation, I had to contact my publisher, and there was nothing we could do. But, the title of the book in English, my title is Thus Spoke the Plant. And the French title, instead of translating there, the title that they gave was like The Woman That Listened to Plants. And just this subtle change, I contacted my publisher because that's not the spirit of the book. It's not about me. It's about the plant. Yeah. But just as a clause, is like that is a translation that is being made. But hopefully the rest of the book is also like,
I guess you wouldn't be able to verify, right?
Yeah. So, but yeah, otherwise it's available everywhere, wherever. And yeah.
Great. Dr. Monica Gagliano, thank you so much for being on Adventures Through the Mind. And thank you again for writing that beautiful book. I hope that, well, that was interesting. I realized that, sorry, I just had a weird gapping moment. Let me start that all over again, okay? Dr. Monica Gagliano, thank you for the beautiful book. I found it very inspiring, and it touched me in a wonderful way that is still unfolding, and hope to continue unfolding in me for a while. And also thank you for your time today here on the podcast.
No, thank you, James, for having me, and for a very different conversation. You had very beautiful amazingly articulated questions. I really enjoyed that, and you gave me to thinking about. That's always good. So yeah, I really appreciate. Thank you.
Thank you. And cut. Okay, thank you so much for tuning into this episode of Adventures Through the Mind. If you liked what you heard, check out Thus Spoke the Plant by Monica Gagliano, Gagliano, and you can buy that book at all available retailers. And as Dr. Gagliano expressed, you can also get it in French now. And so, yes, you could check out that book. You could also check out The Mind of Plants, Narratives of Vegetal Intelligence, of which she is an editor. And that just came out. I don't have a copy of it yet, but very excited to give it a read. And you can follow Dr. Gagliano's work in particular at monicagagliano.com. Links to all of this will be contained in the show notes to this episode. If you find value in this podcast, this episode specifically or in general, please do support the show financially. Your financial contributions allow me to earn an income while doing this as my full-time work, which it is. Patreon is the best way to do that. And even if you give as little as $4 or $5 a month, that goes a really long way. So I appreciate you doing that. You can head to patreon.com/James W. Gesso to become a patron. Other support options, PayPal, cryptocurrency, affiliate company purchases on the shop, so on and so forth. All of that you can find in the description to this episode. Links to that, I mean. And yeah, so thank you so much for tuning in. If you'd like to follow what I do, at James W. Gesso on social media, JESSO, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter. I don't really like social media. It's not good for my brain. I put stuff out on there, but I try to avoid it. Maybe you do too. And if you'd like to stay off social media or not have to rely on those platforms to stay in contact, you can reach out to me on my newsletter, and links to sign up are contained in the description to this episode as well. And I release a monthly digest of the things that have come out since last month, and then very periodically different sort of updates. So yes, sign up for the newsletter. That's all. Thank you so much for tuning in. I'll see you on the next episode of Adventures Through the Mind. And until then, take care.